Everyone has a shadow, the part of us we'd rather not see. The less we acknowledge it, the more power it has. If you're aware of your flaws, at least you've got a shot at changing them. But when you shove them aside and pretend they're not there, they build up quietly and can suddenly explode when you least expect it. Even with the best intentions, this hidden part of us can sabotage what we're trying to do. Carl Jung broke the shadow down into two kinds. The personal shadow, which is the side of ourselves we don't want to admit exists, and the collective shadow, which reflects the darker side of society. Let's start with the personal shadow. Jung described it as everything we'd rather not be. It holds the traits we find unpleasant or shameful, things we try to hide from ourselves because they seem weak, embarrassing, or even wrong. This side often shows itself when we're overwhelmed, anxious, drunk, or emotional. You might say something cruel in the middle of a light-hearted chat and not know where it came from. That's your shadow slipping through. And when we refuse to own these parts, we often project them onto others. We blame people for traits we can't accept in ourselves. Some people do become aware of their shadow and manage it consciously, but many don't. They deny it so completely that it acts on its own, surfacing in strange moods, irritability, or unkind behavior. Jung emphasized in his writings how important it is in therapy and life in general to become aware of our shadow and how it leaks into our actions. Even though we often think of the shadow as negative, it's not all bad. Facing it can actually uncover strengths. Jung noted that the shadow can hold useful traits like natural instincts, gut-level wisdom, creative sparks, and realistic views. Marie-Louise von Franz, who worked closely with Jung, said the shadow isn't always an enemy. It's more like a person we live with. Sometimes you have to yield, sometimes push back, sometimes show kindness. The shadow only becomes dangerous when we ignore or misunderstand it. Left unexplored, it holds back our potential and creates inner roadblocks that stop us from growing. Think of someone who believes being assertive is the same as being rude. They might bury their ability to stand up for themselves, and over time, this could affect their confidence, career, finances, and relationships. Then, when they see someone else being assertive, they feel anger or guilt. That's the shadow at work. These buried traits shouldn't stay hidden. We have to bring them into our lived experience. That means letting go of pride and letting the ego make space for them. Our dreams also reveal the shadow, often as someone of the same gender who criticizes us. It feels like being judged by a part of ourselves we didn't want to face, often leaving us with a sense of shame or discomfort. But that voice is important. It's a call to look closer at ourselves. Shadow work is the practice of identifying and integrating these hidden parts. It's slow, hard work, like going toe-to-toe with your own inner Hercules-level challenges. You start by noticing how you react to people and situations, being brutally honest with yourself. You also pay attention to dreams and inner symbols. This self-awareness doesn't destroy the shadow. It just stops it from running your life. It's not a battle between light and dark, but a conversation between the two. Jung said, "There is no light without shadow, and no real wholeness without imperfection." The goal isn't to be perfect, but to be whole. The lifelong process of individuation, bringing the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves into harmony, is how we align the ego with the self, the full picture of who we are. Facing the shadow can be scary, but truth brings freedom. Getting real with yourself means digging deep to find what's been forgotten, distorted, or hidden. That's how we move toward authenticity, not by pretending the darkness isn't there, but by finally turning on the light. Most people don't take the time or don't want to deeply reflect on their behavior, even when they're aware of it. Thinking about how the unconscious plays into it all. That's even rarer. But that's where the shadow sneaks in. It's not just personal. Some parts of it come from outside of us. That's what Jung called the collective shadow, the darker side of our shared culture and society. It's the stuff that clashes with our shared values, often invisible but deeply harmful. The collective shadow shows up in the cruelty people inflict on each other and the environment, and the consequences can last for generations. We see this shadow in all kinds of ways, through violent acts, systemic oppression, willful ignorance of suffering, or simply pretending we're not responsible for any of it. Sure, it sometimes takes the shape of outright horror, war, genocide, mass killings. But it also hides under more subtle, even appealing disguises, like forcing language, beliefs, or cultural norms onto others in the name of progress or peace. Like all forms of the shadow, personal or collective, it can be everywhere while still going unnoticed. Outwardly, the collective shadow shows itself in suffering, poverty, sickness, addiction, the erasure of cultures, and so on. But it also runs deep inside individuals, causing people to feel ashamed of their identity, disconnected from their roots, weighed down by depression, or driven by a need for vengeance just to make others feel the pain they've endured. This collective darkness has often been labeled as evil. In Christian terms, it's like being possessed by the devil, losing touch with humanity and acting out something far more destructive. Jung believed the way to respond to this wasn't through condemnation, but through self-knowledge. Facing the shadow helps us see both our light and our darkness. When an issue becomes taboo or ignored in a society, when people deny it, shift the blame, or avoid responsibility, it's likely a shadow issue. That's why moral, political, and spiritual accountability matters. When we face our own darkness, we stop unconsciously dumping it on others. That in itself is a service to the world. If we look at the aftermath of terrible historical events, wars, genocides, oppression, the pain doesn't end with the act, it lingers. But instead of facing it, many of us just want to move on. Denial is easier. Still, throughout history, there have been efforts to make amends, public apologies, reparations, visiting sites of tragedy, and so on. But surface-level gestures aren't enough. For real change, the shadow has to be processed, not just by leaders, but by communities. The painful truth has to be spoken. Victims, perpetrators, witnesses, and bystanders alike need space to feel and be heard. For grief, rage, and responsibility to be acknowledged. Real healing comes from truth-telling, even when it's hard. One of the clearest examples of the collective shadow was Nazi Germany. Ordinary people, through their own personal shadows, ended up following a system that encouraged horrifying acts. Things they never would have imagined themselves doing became possible when the personal shadow met the collective one. That's why dealing with our inner conflicts is crucial, because they can feed into wider patterns of destruction. Healing starts within, when we work through our own shadows, through honesty, emotional awareness, and even dream analysis. We stop acting out of blind reaction. We regain lost parts of ourselves, grow as individuals, and create healthier relationships. And then, with that self-awareness, we're better equipped to recognize and address the collective shadow too. We become more accountable, not just for our own lives, but for the kind of world we're helping to create. If we can stay present and aware, we can recognize the roots of violence in ourselves and others. That awareness gives us a chance to change, to wake up together and avoid repeating the past. Because the truth is, the war isn't just out there, it's also inside us. and we all have a role in preventing it from exploding. To wrap it up, facing your personal shadow is the first step. It's hard, slow, and uncomfortable work, but necessary. Only by doing that can we prevent becoming passive vessels for unconscious pain and destructive patterns. Once we've faced ourselves, we can deal with the bigger, collective patterns with clarity and courage. Speaking the truth and carrying our share of the darkness lightens the load for everyone. If we don't, the shadow just grows darker, until history repeats itself in ways we'll wish we had stopped. And here's the part that often gets overlooked. Confronting the shadow, whether personal or collective, is not a one-time event. It's a process that unfolds over years, sometimes even a lifetime. It doesn't happen in the therapist's office over a single session, or during a weekend retreat filled with meditation and journaling. Those things help, absolutely. But real shadow work shows up in the grind of everyday life, in our reactions, our judgments, our arguments, our silences. It's in the moment we choose to pause before lashing out. It's in the discomfort of admitting we were wrong, or the courage to say, "This hurts and I need to deal with it." The truth is, the shadow thrives in avoidance. It gains strength every time we deny our envy, our anger, our prejudice, our desire to control or manipulate. It hides behind the mask of perfectionism, behind sarcasm, self-deprecation, virtue signaling. And collectively, it hides behind nationalism, economic systems, religious dogma, and even noble-sounding ideals when they're used to justify harm. That's why awareness alone isn't enough. Awareness without responsibility is like seeing smoke and doing nothing to stop the fire. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That means looking at ourselves without flinching, not excusing, not glamorizing, but recognizing that within us all is the capacity to harm, just as there is the capacity to heal. That's the paradox. You are both the wound and the medicine. You are both the one who suffers and the one who inflicts suffering. Owning that duality is what frees us from being controlled by it. When we don't do this work, when we project our unresolved inner conflicts outward, it creates division, violence, and scapegoating. We see it in how people dehumanize those who disagree with them, how political discourse turns into warfare, how history becomes a battleground instead of a place for learning. The collective shadow erupts when masses of people project their fear and shame onto a group they label as other. And this doesn't just happen in the past, it happens now. Every time we silence a minority voice, every time we ignore a cry for help, every time we protect comfort over truth, we feed that shadow. But there's hope in the fact that the opposite is also true. Every moment of honesty softens the shadow. Every time you take responsibility for your behavior, apologize with sincerity, or listen with empathy, you're doing the work. Not just for yourself, but for your family, your community, even generations to come. Because trauma gets passed down, yes, but so does healing. This is why healing isn't selfish, it's revolutionary. Choosing to face what's broken inside you makes it harder for that brokenness to break someone else. When you meet your rage instead of unleashing it, when you name your shame instead of hiding it, when you hold your grief instead of numbing it, you make space. Space for growth, space for love, space for wholeness. And the world needs that more than ever. Of course, shadow work isn't glamorous. You probably won't get a round of applause for doing it. It won't look pretty on a resume or make you the life of the party. In fact, it might make you quieter, gentler, more discerning about your words, more aware of your limits. It might break your heart open a dozen times, but through that breaking, something new is born. Integrity, depth, real connection. A sense that you're finally living from a place that's not reactive, but real. And when more people begin to live from that place, things shift. The world doesn't change overnight, but it becomes more human, a little less divided, a little more tender, and maybe, just maybe, a bit more capable of holding the weight of our shared past without collapsing under it or repeating it blindly. So yes, the war is inside us, but so is the ceasefire. So is the healing. So is the possibility of a new story. We just have to be brave enough to tell the truth and tender enough to hold it. Thanks for spending time with this reflection on the shadow. If it resonated with you, feel free to support the message by liking, commenting, or sharing. Until next time.